Hello and welcome back. We're on the last episode, which I'm really sad about. It's episode 4, which is sustainability and ethics. Now, we've gone through the last 3 episodes, which was really exciting, store concepts. We had merchandising and display, we had people in retail, and now we're on sustainability and ethics. So as part of this 4-part series, if you want to check out any of the previous episodes, they're available and the links are below. You can listen to them on the podcast channel, or you can watch it back on the YouTube channel for the videos as well. I'm joined by my co-host, which is the amazing Tim Radley, and he's owner of VM Unleashed and author of Retail in the Meaning Madness. So Tim, we're going to talk about sustainability and ethics, and it's something that I'm not 100% understanding of. I think even as a consumer or as a retailer, there's a lot of noise out there with it. And before we came on, we were just talking around, I suppose, what it means as a retailer if you do have a business. Sustainability is quite a broad word. So how do we maybe look at narrowing that down to understand it a little bit better?
Great. Well, hello, Louise, again. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. That one question could probably last a whole 40 minutes, I think, Louise. It's part of one of the problems if you're trying to get a sustainable message across, or what is sustainability? I think in its broadest sense, people would understand it as more to do with the product itself and the supply chain behind it. The product I'm bringing you is made in a sustainable way, in so much as it's probably from raw materials, which are sustainable, recyclable. The supply chain is not kind of pumping out enormous amounts of pollution and products crossing halfway across the world to get to you, and that when I get the product itself, I can recycle that in due course or whatever. I think most people, if they think about sustainable products and businesses and retailers, that's the focus of it. Within that, there's the different ways of selling or not selling. I think fundamentally the aim of sustainability, it does without doubt do a huge amount of damage to the world, to the environment. It contributes to climate change. All my facts are close, but they might be a little bit fuzzy because the data kind of changes so often. But I think if you took the retail industry and it was a country, I think its carbon emissions would make it like the 2nd or 3rd highest contributor, in the world. So it is a very kind of damaging industry. The amount of product that goes into landfill, or is incinerated, and again, all the issues with that. That's why retail has become a focus of sustainability, because, it is damaging in many ways. Fundamentally, for all the details that we talk about, it really is about buying less things, or perhaps more accurately, producing less things. Because again, that's another big argument, and think about it yourselves in your own lives, have you actually got enough stuff? Christmas is not far away, and I'm not trying to say don't go out and buy things, because we still need to go and buy things. And it's important, I think, to have new things. It's not just a practical thing. You can live in the same jumper for 20 years on a practical level, but, to have some kind of emotional positivity from retailing is very important. But there are ways to do it that don't create this big problem for the world. So, for example, within that big answer, if you like, rental, people renting products rather than buying products, still new products, but renting is one avenue which is growing a lot. Reuse, so what we called second-hand, but is now very much pre-loved, vintage, etc., is in certain groups. I mean, I'm talking, I suppose, UK, and I'm talking kind of southeastern London here, but actually there is this figure as well that they think that by 2030 in London, there'll be more second-hand pre-loved purchases than fast fashion. That's a prediction I've seen from various quarters. So in certain areas, there's a real momentum and a real kind of glamour, teenagers, students, that in fact, you can buy, I don't know, particularly sports brands, Adidas, Nike, really iconic products which were made in the, 10, 20, 30 years ago, which are now very, very sought after. And even products which are reworked. Brick Lane in London, which was very much the place where you went for an Indian meal 20, 30 years ago. That was its history. But now is a huge center for vintage clothing. So not only do you get, people who collect vintage clothing and they resell it, but you have people who literally get 2 or 3 pieces of Adidas that can't be used anymore, and then they create something new out of them. So there's all kind of creation in it. So, rental, all of this kind of secondhand market, development of new materials, which are sustainable, recyclable materials, just simply wearing things for longer. There's a really interesting group of people emerging on LinkedIn who help people work with their wardrobes. There's this other horrific fact, which is again related to London, but it's how many pieces people have in a wardrobe and how many pieces, something like 25% they never wear. We've got into this kind of just buying. So these people go and they literally don't take you into a shop. This is what you need to buy. They literally take you into your bedroom and empty your wardrobe and say, right, this is really good and this is really in now. And if you mix that with that, then you've got, it's training people as well. So there's all kinds of initiatives which you could say are sustainable, but at the bottom of it, I think it really comes down to producing less new products, making more money from existing products, and that's why obviously with the inherent less pollution, less damage that's involved in that, that's why sustainability has become this growing kind of message, particularly I think from the younger generations, although absolutely this is not a generational thing. You've got people who've been working sustainably for years and years and decades.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and what you said there, the producing less, and I think it was there was an article there recently where Zara, the clothing brand, are now, they're fixing clothes. If you have maybe damage, you can bring them in and they will, they'll rework them as such, and that again will make that piece of clothing or that garment last that bit longer, which again feeds into that whole sustainability thing. And I think it's small things sometimes, I think, and recapping on what you said there, Tim, it's, there is a lot in sustainability, but I think it's looking at the everyday things we do and making those small incremental changes that really have that, I suppose, that long-term impact. And rental was one that you brought up, which I thought is fantastic. And we're seeing that happen now a lot more, which we would never have thought about, 5-10 years ago. It was very much fast fashion. Secondhand, again, a big change there, vintage clothing, which is, real on trend, I suppose, as well, when you look at it. And I love that idea of people going in and reworking your wardrobe and, looking at how they can style it and make use of that 25% of stuff that you never use. I'd say it's probably a little bit higher for me personally, because I definitely think it's definitely needed, and there is great stuff there that you can reuse again. I think looking at, I suppose, and I get asked this question a lot, Tim, and smaller retailers sometimes don't really know what to do, I suppose, from an everyday piece in their business to be a little bit more sustainable. And it doesn't have to be something massive. But do you have any kind of ideas that you could give any maybe smaller stores there, small independents? Maybe they just have a single site store and they're looking to be a little bit more sustainable in how they manage their business.
Yeah, I mean, say sustainability people tend to focus on the product and the supply chain, where it came from. So that's a good starting point for any business of any size, is if you can actually, delve deeper into where your product comes from and who makes it, who delivers it. And I appreciate that, smaller businesses cannot always change wholesale, literally, where their product comes from. But that's a good place to start, is to actually, see the supply chain to your actual shop and see if there are alternatives. If you're in the food business, then there probably are alternatives there, more local, suppliers, more certified organic suppliers, etc., etc. Whereas if you're in the more mass merchandise, not so easy, or fashion as well. But that's one place to start. But the other thing is actually how you behave, how you run your business, you run your shop, how you engage with the world around you as a shop in a location will say as much about your, your views on sustainability as anything. So things like you would do at home, so as an individual, so how much of the packaging you recycle, the energy use, very topical at the moment, but also how you interact with the world around you. So, do you volunteer? Do you do things, or your team do things with the local community, local environment? Whether it's kind of picking up litter, whether it's getting involved in building footpaths, whether you drive to work, or whether you actually cycle to work. I've come across several retailers in smaller towns I've worked with whose seems their primary aim in the morning is to get their car in front of their shops because there's not much parking. Well, firstly, if you cycle, if it's possible, instead of driving, that's kind of probably better for you and the environment, but it also frees up space for shoppers to actually park in front of your shop, which has to be a priority. So, how you live your life, how your shop lives its life, can be very sustainable as well. And, this, again, you see in some of the big businesses. So even if you're small, it's important to look at, see what's happening. So, for example, a brand like Timberland, in their contract with their shop workers, there are a certain number of days a year where you're paid to go out and volunteer. And you go out and volunteer generally on environmental products. So typically and historically, they help to build footpaths, green spaces within cities and towns where they had a shop. There are other brands, a brand called Sperry's, I remember, in the US, who make shoes, and particularly boat shoes. They're really famous for. And every week they would be down on the beaches collecting rubbish, and helping the environment in that way. So, yes, the product that you have in your shop, where it comes from is really important. But if you're selling third-party product, that might not be as easy to change. But the way you actually kind of act within the environment, within the community, is really important. But, on the subject of rental, that doesn't necessarily have to be, excuse me, a big brand thing as well. So, for example, you can, let's say, sell something, let's say a dress or something, for £80, and you kind of can sell one. If it's a really good product, which is kind of the season, so people want it, but they don't want it, excuse me, all the season, then potentially you could rent that out, several times, maybe 10, 15 times for £20 each. So for one item, you can have the initial £80 that you sell, or you can kind of rent it out several times and actually make a lot more money from it. So that's, Louise mentioned Zara. That's something that the kind of the economics now start to work for a business like them. And it's interesting now, Zara is a really good kind of, guide as to where the world is going. And they kind of, to a certain extent invented fast fashion, but now they are renting products through third parties like Higher Street. It was announced this week that actually they're into the second hand, or that's kind of coming along. And interestingly, that's going to be in shops in the UK, which I think the UK is kind of like at the head of a lot of this kind of sentiment around sustainability. So, it will be a balance. What you've had is specialists who rent, specialists who remake, specialists who resell. And those people will still be there. They're very important, and that's what they do. But I think in the bigger brands, and why not in smaller third-party brands as well, you can have a little bit of different things. Ultimately, you're still being commercially successful, but you're maybe not buying so much product yourself. You're making it from a kind of a variety of ways. So I wouldn't disclude anything, because you're not a huge kind of international business. But the fallback, as I say always, is how you live your life, how your shop lives its life, and the impact it has on your local environment. We can't all save the world, but maybe we can help a little bit with the town that we have our shop in.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot at the moment around, I suppose, retail businesses with this B Corp status. Some of them have, and I'm seeing it come through online. And for anyone that maybe isn't too familiar what that is or what that's about, Tim, can you give a little bit of insight into what that B Corp even means? We know it's obviously a certification of some kind for those sustainable businesses, but what that means maybe, or is it the case that some businesses need to be working towards that, or what's your take on it?
It's at the early days, and it's very important, because one of the big problems with sustainability is transparency and actually finding the truth.
Yes.
It's difficult to know who to buy from, what to buy, if it's not clear. So the B Corp is like a certification which is given after a business has to be assessed in a very detailed way, not in all of the issues we've talked about. So not just supply chain, the product, but the carbon footprint of the business, the way it uses energy. So all of these issues, it's very stringent, that you will be given this certification to prove that you actually follow all of these guidelines. You are of a certain level. The problem being, I guess, particularly now in its evolution, is that the public don't really understand or appreciate what this means. There are quite a number of certifications out there, and so for the customer, unless they're actively looking, if they hear something is a B Corp or something else, Soil Association, etc., what that actually means. So it's a growing thing, and governments can play a part in this, because for many years now, when you buy an electrical appliance, a fridge or something, when you buy a house, you have a kind of a very standardized assessment of all the different kind of energy consumptions, etc., about your machine. So some products, it is there. Other products like fashion, there's nothing exists at the moment, anything like that. So that's very difficult. But it's interesting, it's moving on to businesses now, because what the internet has done, obviously, in social media, is that we now know a lot more about the businesses. So it's not just about individual products. Do I love this product? Do I like it? Actually, do I like the business, that is making this? So these B Corps are very, very important as we move forwards. And you're also getting the other side, which is investigation of claims. So not just about having the certification, but there are now, both in Europe and the UK, for example, Asda, ASOS, Boohoo in the UK are under investigation and assessment by the Marketing Commission about their use of the word sustainability. For example, it's too vague. When they apply it to something, maybe one of the products, not all of them, satisfy what sustainability means. So, and in Europe, brands like H&M, Decathlon have also been pulled up by the European Union authorities about making these vague claims about being sustainable or not. So it's an area which is developing. And I personally think this kind of standardization is really important, which is what B Corp is definitely trying to do in the UK in terms of businesses, so that you get a very clear understanding whether it's a product or whether it's a business, exactly, not even how sustainable it is in a vague way, but specifically in terms of, the supply chain, the carbon footprint, etc., that you can actually understand individually. I mean, there are brands out there, which when you buy them, it will show the supply chain. So you can see exactly where it came from, where the raw material came from, where it was produced, and then you can look at the factory data, where it was produced, how much the employees are paid, how much they work, etc. So it is out there. And again, the other extreme, we had a documentary last week on Channel 4 about Shein. This, I'm trying not to give my personal opinion on it, but it is like the mega fast fashion brand, originating from China. And in this documentary, it was saying that per garment that you buy, Shein workers maybe get 3 pence or 3 cents in Ireland per item. They have 1 day off a month, So the more that we know about these things, the more transparent, the more that the marking is sustainable, then all of this will help. And, at the end of the day, if it doesn't bother you as a customer, then that's your personal choice. But I think the fact that we see big brands, like Zara, like Primark, all, they're on their way, it's work in progress, but they're all seeing the ethical, commercial sense in starting to adopt these kind of sustainable ways of producing product and selling it. So it is a movement. It is growing and growing and growing. I think the younger generation is really going to push in for it because it's their world, as we move forward more than ever. So yeah, B Corp, it's a very important part of a pretty complex picture, which needs kind of simplifying as we move forwards.
I think you touched on ethics there, just slightly towards the end there. We're talking about sustainability, and you mentioned before about sustainability and ethics and how I suppose you can't have one without the other, in a business.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think businesses are kind of good or bad. And I can't believe, as I mentioned to you, I cannot believe that a business that treats its staff really poorly, ethically, is not a good business, but is fantastic at sustainability. Just doesn't make sense. If a business is governed well with the right values about how it treats the world and everything in it, then they're going to have a sustainable supply chain as much as possible. They're going to treat their staff well. They're going to want their staff to be engaged in the whole kind of sustainability thing as well. So, you know, governance, environment, ethics, all of these come together. And so, you know, it's why when we look at that supply chain, we're not just now wanting transparency in, you know, where did the cotton come from? Who grew it? Did it deplete some local water source? You know, like it is in various places in the world to get that cotton to me. But all the people who work in that chain, the people who pick the cotton, the people who you know, send it to the factory, etc., the people who work in the factory, are they treated in a good way? So you want transparency all the way through this to decide whether you like a business or you don't like a business. And it goes right the way through. I mean, Patagonia is in many ways is a great example of a sustainable business, in the way that they've always kind of sourced their products as they go through. They had a famous advert where they launched a new jacket, and the kind of the advertising line was, do you really need this jacket? It's a fantastic jacket, but, you know, have you got a jacket already that'll do the job? You know, well, you know, it's here if you want it, but really. And it was a genuine, it'd be easy to kind of, you know, do that from a marketing perspective, but it fits in with the whole ethos of their brand. And just very recently, the owner has sold the business, but he's sold it to a trust, so that it's sold to a trust, and the trust must invest profits into the environmental projects, environmental companies trying to improve, you know, the world. So, you know, from top to bottom, from beginning to end, product, climate, people, you know, that's kind of one business which has always kind of been very consistent in, you know, how it approaches everything. And, you know, going back to the question of smaller retailers, you know, you've got the opportunity to, on your particular high street, you know, not just to be the best clothes shop, the best butcher, but you're the retailer which is the one that is, wow, as a business, how it treats people, how it volunteers, how it interacts with the community, how it sponsors local things, how it recycles, how it always uses bikes, you know, all these things, that can make you the number one, the destination as a good retailer. And as we go forwards, people are, and particularly after COVID, being a good retailer is really important, and it's a USP in itself.
Yeah, I think, I don't know what your take is, Tim, but I felt for a while that the word sustainability was a buzzword for a while, and probably used in a lot of marketing campaigns as a bit of a driver, when maybe launching products or things like that, without people having, I suppose, an understanding of. And I think you touched on it there, that sustainability can mean very different things for different people with different businesses. And I think, going back to what you said there in the B Corp, and having that transparency, which is really important around businesses. I suppose, talking about businesses that are doing that sustainability piece really well, and we had a little chat about this before, and you brought up a couple of businesses that are really, I suppose, understand sustainability really well, but are really doing it. And one of them was a denim company. I'd love for you to discuss that particular company and what they're doing, Tim.
Absolutely. I'm just going to plug in my computer, everybody. I'm saving energy. But if I don't flick that switch, I might disappear. So that's better. That puts my mind at ease. Yeah, so I mean, you know, I meet a lot of people through LinkedIn, and I have to say the number one subject and people getting in touch and responses to posts is all around sustainability, you know, all of the aspects of it. And it's across all countries. You know, I get a lot of people, Italy seems to be a hotbed of interest. Obviously the UK, Ireland, but America, you know, everywhere. And a younger group of people fascinated by it. And one of the people I met there was a lady called Marie Nancaro, who's in Ireland, in Belfast. And she has a business called Titanic Denim. So she's a denim specialist historically, and she basically upcycles denim into new products, particularly bags and accessories. And she's made these amazing bags, which the fundamental bag itself is denim, but she's also managed to find secondhand vintage, for example, seatbelts from little Fiat 500s. And so she's made the handle of the bag, you know, from these seatbelts. I mean, it's kind of fantastic. So there's an example of a small person with a passion who has created this brand, and they're recycling, they're upcycling materials. And there's a shop just opened in London, right in the heart, just off Oxford Street, called the Good Store. And so her products are now in that shop. And right next to it, which is fabulous, because another one of my favorite brands, which I think I mentioned before, Elvis and Cress. So they're the ones who make bags and accessories from hose pipes, which the London Fire Brigade don't use anymore. When they've had their time, they take the rubber and the materials, they treat them, and then they create these accessories where, if you're lucky, on your bag, you get the name of the fire station that it came from, which is printed on the original hose pipe. And just going back to that whole process, so they take these hose pipes from the fire brigade, and I think 50% of profits that they make goes to the fireman's retirement fund. So again, this whole thing about, you know, sustainability, ethical, and also they create a community as well. And community is really important around this, particularly if you get into the models like renting. So another one of my favorite brands, which is more recent, is a rental brand called Loanhood. And if, like me, you know, and it was the case up until relatively recently, rental was something you did with pretty expensive products and maybe a special occasion. So the classic, you know, is the wedding. I rented my suit. And I've only got, luckily, well, I touch wood, I've only been married once, so it was a good move. So I rented, you know, from Mospros, which was like the classic kind of rental company. But a lot of people was, you know, that was rental. So how do you get young people who are addicted, in the nicest possible term, to fast fashion, and they need this continuous kind of excitement? So Loanhood was set up by three ladies who were in the fashion industry. I think they worked for Topshop, various other businesses, and didn't like the way the business worked, didn't like the way the products came from, didn't like the volumes of product that were being produced and sold. So they kind of stepped back from that and set up this thing called Loanhood. So Loanhood is it's an app. And the key thing behind it is they are creating a community of young people who still love fashion. They still want to wear something different every week. But the way they do it is that this community of basically lenders and borrowers, and everybody is a lender and a borrower. So it's kind of like this juggling, you know, for next weekend, I'm going to borrow that because I want to wear that, and you can lend that, and so on and so on and so on. And so that kind of opened up my eyes, because the branding is very youthful, you know, it's very kind of hip, very kind of on trend, but the community thing really makes sense. And you can also get, you know, young designers in the picture, lending products as well. And it works for everybody. It means you can go out, you can still wear something different, every week, but you don't necessarily have to buy anything new for that. You can make money. So you're spending less on new products, and also you can make some money, you know, on actually kind of renting your products out as well. And also these communities can be ultimately local. So part of their marketing is to go to young areas like Glasgow, Liverpool, London, you know, where they're kind of based. And so you can even have, this really is going back, some great things come, you know, you could have parties, you could have events where you meet up. So you don't even have the cost of, you know, sending packages through the post, because it could almost be a relatively local community that are lending and borrowing. I love that I'm a lender and a borrower at the same time. And again, it sounds cool when it's dressed up in the right way. So that is a really kind of fantastic brand. And another example, just while we're on individual retailers, there's a shop open just off Regent Street, Carnaby Street, which is a Levi's shop. And it's called Levi's House, Haus. And in this shop is all about those different ways of selling and supply chain. So what they have there, anybody who's interested in Levi's, this is amazing. So you can go through their archives, their books of all of the products which they've kind of made, you know, over the decades. And for example, they have up there, you know, all the 501s. And for example, there was one 501 that had a zip. 501s are known for their buttons, but in fact, one was a zip when you couldn't get hold of the metal for the buttons. So that's quite collectible. There's another one where instead of stitching on the pocket, it's painted. Because again, I think this was related to the Second World War, that you couldn't get the stitching. So they literally painted the stitch on. So what Levi's do is they recreate some of these real iconic products in limited assortments every year. They're literally working their way through their catalog. So they're kind of, there's no waste. It's kind of, you know, small collections. There's always a waiting list and people buy them. The other part of the shop is they've scoured all of their factories, offices, all the samples and things that were made, which are kind of hanging around, which they never sold because maybe there was a button missing or there was a bit of stitching that wasn't quite there. And in this shop off Regent Street, there is a kind of a little factory, a workroom below. So all of those products are now for sale. So they're basically upcycling all of this product that would go to waste. And if they're not using the products, then they're using the denim itself to kind of create new products. And you can also go in there and you can take in your existing Levi's and you can have them repaired. You can have adornments put on, personalization, etc. So there isn't a new, you know, product in there which doesn't have some kind of, you know, limited collection, you know, no waste. And much of this story is about recycled materials, upselling, upscaling and repairing. So it's a fascinating shop if you're near there. And it's kind of, again, another big brand who now understands, and they're touching like these different ways of being sustainable. And actually just one other point before I let you ask another question, Louise, but it makes sense for a brand like Levi's and also the sports brand we mentioned earlier, you know, what was happening with secondhand Adidas and Nike, to embrace this, because individuals and small entrepreneurial businesses are already embracing this. As we said earlier, if you want to go and get vintage Adidas, if you want to go and get vintage Nike, if you want to go and get vintage upscaled Levi's, you can go to any number of kind of, particularly in London, you know, say in Brick Lane, you know, shops where you can buy these. So it makes sense for Levi's to embrace their history, embrace the products that people have already bought, and again, create this community. You know, if you love Levi's and you want to repair, if you love Levi's, you want to personalize, if you love Levi's and you want to kind of revisit an old classic iconic product, come to Levi's, because there is business which is going and which is being spread out, you know, quite rightly amongst this secondhand market. So altogether, I think it's a really vibrant kind of dynamic world when you consider what's happening there, where customers, brands, you know, are kind of working in kind of a symbiosis, but what they're all doing is they're kind of keeping products in the market one way or another for much longer than you would do traditionally. So that's, you know, that's all of those, you know, Loanhood, what Levi's are doing. I think it's really kind of exciting. And I think a lot of people find it exciting. It's not kind of dull environmentalism, if you like. It's really active, dynamic, real, you know, and you can all play your part in enjoying products, but actually also, you know, helping the planet and everything else.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I think, you know, you touched on there, you know, and I love that idea of the lenders and the borrowers, and they're in this community of sharing out, you know, what is it? One person's trash is another person's treasure, whatever that slogan is, you know what I mean? That other people will really enjoy having that upcycling kind of movement that seems to be happening at the moment. I suppose, and we talked about loads of different, you gave so many great examples, Tim, and those really great ones there, I think, you know, and just kind of touch on a little bit of them there. We talked about rental, we talked about renting clothes, the likes of Zara, other chains, and doing that, the second-hand movement, which we talked about there, and Loanhood was an example that you used there, and reworked clothing. So again, retailers that are, you're bringing your garments back and they're maybe getting repaired in-house by that particular retail brand that you bought off. And then again, looking at materials that are recycled and upcycled more so. And you touched on a couple of examples there as well, I suppose. And then this idea of people coming in, helping you rework your wardrobe as such to reuse and recycle what you have instead of going out and buying more, looking at producing less. And you touched on Timberland that have it built in their contract that you can volunteer as part, and it's a paid volunteer piece as part of their contract to go out and support their local community. But as well, to tie in with that, it could be on a beach cleanup thing, it could be an environmental piece that they're doing there, and to drive that, I suppose, their focus or those values within that business. We talked about B Corp status, what that means, and again, understanding, I suppose, and having that bit of transparency in, you know, what that sustainability is in a business piece, and what metrics you need to have within that, and understanding that a little bit better. We talked about supply chain and with stores, wholesalers, and I suppose how you run your store in a day-to-day operating piece. So it could be your packaging, how sustainable that is. I know some people are using, I think is it sugar beet as a plastic, as opposed to actual plastic, which is biodegradable. So different materials you can use there. I know some people are using seaweed packaging, which again is compostable. So looking at different areas like that. And energy consumption in your business, I know it's a hot topic at the moment, but again, understanding how that is, how sustainable that is, and doing those basics, I suppose, right, and understanding that a little bit better in your own business. And you said there's 3 areas around sustainability: product, climate, and people. So I think if we looked at those 3 main components and broke them down in your business today, you know, what deliverables or what actions could you take within those 3 components to really be more sustainable? And you talked about maybe a cycle to work scheme, that some of the governments do that now for businesses, and some of them are subsidized. So maybe it's a cycle scheme piece. You know, maybe it's not parking the car in front of the shop, you know, different things like that. And then you talked about businesses that are reusing products, seat belts, fire hose pipes were some of the examples you gave, which I think are absolutely amazing and really, really interesting, because I think if I said to anyone, I'm using a seatbelt or a fire hose there, and you're going to get an amazing product, and show them the after product, I think they'd be wowed. I think that's really, really interesting. The time goes by really super quick, because you've so many stories, Tim. I don't think you realize once you get on them, and they're really, really interesting. I think I'm recapping on those now, so that people can maybe listen back, pause, maybe take a couple of notes on what you've discussed, and maybe look at generating their own ideas in their own business. We talked about some of the ideas that are happening in small and large retailers, but maybe how can they bring some of those ideas to life, or maybe look at implementing similar strategies in their own business. Before we finish up, I suppose, is there anything else you'd like to add? We've kind of talked, I've done a bit of synopsis there. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Because I know this is your main area of expertise.
Yeah, I was thinking, I was hoping you're going to give me just a few more minutes, but it's about the supply chain and inventory. I mean, for retailers of all size, this is, it's the core of the business, and it relates to cash flow. So if you're a small business, the investment you need to make in product, is big, and it's kind of on the chance you'll sell it. Sometimes it's more certain than others. So this inventory model is changing, and this is directly linked to sustainability and waste, etc. But the existing or traditional model is kind of the commitment model. You do what you can, whether as a retailer in a town centre or a multinational, to try to work out what the customer will want to buy next month, next season, next year. But more or less you commit, and sometimes the punt will pay off. Safe product you'll be okay with, but it's also things that we get wrong as well. So, that's a big kind of bet, and it involves a lot of money. If you start to move some or more to this kind of on demand, what you're literally doing, of course, is you're not committing to buying until somebody's going to buy from you. And I'll give you an example, which again is fairly much in its infancy, but is extraordinary if it really gets foothold. And this is digital printing technology. There's a company up in the north of London. I have no affiliation, but I'll say their name. They're called Cornet, because you should go and have a look at the website and visit. They have these enormous digital fabric printers. And so they're already used. For example, if you sell an array of T-shirts and it's got everything from the Rolling Stones, Kiss, whatever on it, instead of having to commit up front to X amount of each, you can just, on your website, these are the options. And then you give a business like Cornet the designs, the type of T-shirt, color, etc. And they will literally print so you don't know it's printed. We're not talking, like a photocopy standard here, but an extraordinary kind of, really, really good quality. And that can come off your website. It's out the door and it's sent to the people who want to buy it. And, you get the money. And you didn't have to put anything up front, in particular. And that has now been developed to extraordinary technologies now, which, for example, you have on your website, this dress, and somebody wants to buy it. So yes, they click the button, etc. Again, using similar technology and process, you can literally have the pattern of that product printed onto plain material. So you're literally printing fabric, and you're printing pattern on fabric. A laser printer in about 5 seconds cuts out all the pieces. And then adjacent, there's kind of like a seamstress college, a local kind of initiative to give people work, which is fabulous in itself. So you can have a dress that only existed virtually, that arrives again in your home 24 hours later, that was printed from scratch, there's no supply chain which went halfway around the world to produce this fashion item. There's not the pollution on that. So this whole kind of, I have a virtual assortment online. It doesn't exist, but you can buy it. But as soon as you buy it, the wheels go into motion and then you can have it. And again, it means you commit to marketing, selling a virtual assortment, but you don't necessarily have to kind of commit to the physical stock and make those kind of gambles up front. So it's a very good cash flow proposition. So I think this committed assortment moves to a virtual, whether the customer knows it or not, on demand product. But I think bespoke, knowing that you're waiting a little bit longer for something made just for you, is also a really, really good proposition for businesses to have. And again, you don't have to invest until somebody is committed. And the world of digital printers, depending on, what area that you work in and what type of product you're selling, is something which, again, can create literally something from nothing. But for example, if you were in a DIY shop and you needed little kind of screws and bolts and whatever to do your job, then it's feasible. Again, you virtually order, and these things could be printed 3D, either in a local shop pickup place, ultimately even in an office, or every kind of new group of houses and businesses might have a digital printer, in which case you're completely cutting out, a lot of the pollution and the distribution issues. So, some of that might sound like science fiction, but when you're either a big retailer or a small retailer, keep an eye on this inventory issue. Do I really need to commit all my money up front to buy product to put in my shop? Or do I just need to invest some, and the rest I can kind of work with intelligently, but critically, I can invest it when I know somebody wants to buy it. And that, so that makes a whole different perspective on, the commerciality of your business, as say the cash flow, the investment, profitability. But also, of course, it means that there should be less waste, ultimately less pollution in the whole kind of supply chain process. So it's sustainable. I wouldn't say accidentally, but it's sustainable from the back of commercial common sense as well. So, particularly these days, there's this very, with the cost of living, sustainable products can be more expensive than non-sustainable, mass market products. So, but going forwards, there can be ways where actually making profit as a retailer do actually link to being sustainable. And for the customer as well, they get the benefit of the product that they want, no returns, and hopefully, buy less product and use them for longer as well. So the supply chain technology, is a real area to watch, because that's going to help with the wider kind of sustainability issues.
Yeah. And I think that's really interesting. I think looking at, I know a number of years ago, Mother Care, for, a lot of their products, their car seats, it was all, you had to order them. So because they just on site, they didn't have that space to house all of those larger products. So you would have the iPad, and you'd have that team member in that particular area of the store, and they would order through the iPad those bigger items. I think for a long time there was the perception that if you didn't have all of the clothing and all of the sizes, that people aren't going to buy it. But I think Next have a great in-store ordering service, and so does a lot of other companies. And I think that whole idea of ordering is, and I think we're now a little bit more adjusted to online, where we are so used to that now, that I think it's a model that people are now more than ever probably have more of an appetite for that, for sure, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. No surprise, Next is one of the people who are adopting the kind of on-demand model as well, for their gift items. And I'd be surprised again, you know, with generic t-shirts with different patterns, it makes complete sense. You know, why invest in 20,000 Rolling Stones and 30,000 Kiss t-shirts if you can have a kind of a, if you like, a skeleton assortment in shops, but you replenish and you supply particular online requests in a more on-demand way. So yeah, there's a lot of, you know, commercial and sustainable, you know, they certainly can work together, and hopefully more as we go forwards.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept, Tim, and one I think that probably I haven't heard a lot about. It's very much in the process. It's a little bit new at the moment, but it's exciting. It's exciting to see those changes with the likes of Next and other ones like that, because they're very future focused, I find. So you see it starting with them, and then hopefully it'll trickle down.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. You know, lots of mergers. It's not so long ago, Etsy. You probably all know Etsy, where you go for you know, homemade items, which you know are from small craftsmen, artisans generally, who are, you know, making things, you know, and they bought Depop, which is basically an app for people to kind of sell their products, a little bit like Loanhood, except you're buying and selling, not renting and borrowing to each other. So you've kind of there got the world of bespoke meeting the world of kind of secondhand, and you know, they're quite different propositions, but it's interesting that, you know, those two kind of businesses are now one, and you're going to get this, let's say, this blurring of different kind of channels. At the end of the day, as long as the customer, you know, they get the product that they want. Maybe sometimes, you know, sometimes we won't probably buy exclusively secondhand. Some of us might, but we might buy some. We might buy some new, but then we might give that on to kind of, you know, secondhand. We might rent for certain occasions. You know, we rent our music. More people are renting cars than ever before. And I think, you know, you rent your whole furniture for your house. So the renting mentality, the non-ownership mentality, is something which is really growing. And, you know, I guess people like Apple, people like Spotify, and the like, you know, they're ones that kind of help to change this mindset that ownership, possessions is not, you know, the be all and end all. Yeah.
It's been an amazing time I've had with you, Tim, and I'm really sad it's the last episode that we've had together, but we've had some amazing conversations, and again, check them out over the last couple of episodes that we've had. It's come to an end. Thank you so much, Tim, for being part of this amazing series all around retail, and you're a real salmon of knowledge in that space. So thank you so much. Just so if anyone wants to check you out, you are on LinkedIn, and you're quite active on that if anyone wants to reach out to you with any questions.
Excellent. No, it's been a pleasure. Well, all good. Well, actually, most of the good series have 6 episodes, but you never know. A Line of Duty went on for several series, didn't it? So we'll see on that one. But no, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for everybody who's been listening. And yeah, if you want to contact me on LinkedIn, I'm always happy to connect and, you know, answer any questions or queries that people might have. You know, community again. Retail is so much about community, and everything we've talked about in the last 4 episodes. We talked specifically people, but sustainability, shop location, etc. You know, it's all about community. You sell to people, so you need to develop that. So yeah, so come and connect, and you might meet some other people as well.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Tim. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye, everyone.